After attempting to seize an ancestral family ranch and devastatingly blocking the rightful owner from his own property for over a year, they didn't just get sued, they got criminally prosecuted. Every penny they fraudulently collected, every false legal document they filed, and every single outrageous demand they issued came back to bury them. The ringleader, a woman who called herself the governess of the community, ended up not just banned from the neighborhood she tried to rule, but facing jail time. You won't believe the chilling audio evidence that brought them down. Welcome back to Property Nightmare Stories. If you've ever had a run-in with a tyrannical neighbor, an overreaching HOA, or someone who thinks they're above the law, you are in the right place. We've got the story of the ranch seizure that shocked the state. Before we dive into this absolute insanity, you know the drill. Smash that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our deep dives into neighborhood tyranny, and let us know in the comments if you would have fought back this hard. Let's get into the nightmare. This nightmare begins not in a planned suburban development, but on the sprawling, untamed outskirts of one. Our protagonist is Mark, whose family has owned the massive 200-acre Coyote Creek Ranch for 4 generations. It's an original working piece of land, separated from the new, master-planned community. The estate's at Blackwood Ridge by an old creek bed and a rickety barbed wire fence. The ranch is quiet, dusty, and miles from being a suburban home. Mark lived on the coast for work, but drove out every few months for maintenance and to check the boundaries. The estates at Blackwood Ridge, meanwhile, was the picture of manicured conformity, famous statewide for issuing fines over the shade of white paint. Their community was built right up to Mark's old barbed wire fence, and that, my friends, is where the trouble started. The first sign was small. Mark drove up his long, private dirt access road to find a professionally printed, laminated sign stuck right next to his private gate. It read, "Coyote Creek Ranch. Access restricted. Subject to Blackwood Ridge Architectural Review Committee ARC jurisdiction." Mark laughed, thinking it was a prank. He ripped the sign down and tossed it into his truck. He spent the weekend repairing the old fence on his side of the survey line. He didn't see another soul. But 3 weeks later, when he returned, the sign was back, 3 of them bolted to reinforced wooden posts. In a new addition, a heavy, industrial-grade chain was padlocked across his own private access gate with a massive silver lock. Next to the gate stood a nervous-looking man in a crisp golf shirt. "Hold it right there, sir. This property is currently under a temporary legal restraint by the Blackwood Ridge Arc. I'm going to have to ask you to turn your vehicle around." Mark was stunned. "Restraint? This is my land. Coyote Creek Ranch. I own it. Who are you?" The man, Mr. Hemlock, puffed out his chest. "I am the compliance officer for the Blackwood Ridge Homeowners Association, and this property has been cited for multiple egregious violations." Mark stepped out of his truck, blood beginning to boil. "I'm not in your community, pal. My deed predates your subdivision by 70 years. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here." Hemlock only shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. The board, under Ms. Victoria Sterling, has determined that the aesthetics and integrity of Blackwood Ridge require this property to be brought into compliance. Until the initial property transfer documentation is processed, you are not authorized to enter the grounds. This land, for now, is under our control." Mark felt a cold spike of panic. Property transfer documentation? This wasn't a fine. This was an attempted seizure. Luck refused to answer, only repeating under temporary restraint and threatening to call private security if Mark didn't leave. Mark was left standing there, looking at his own locked gate, an imposter standing guard. And the terrifying implication that some neighborhood association believed they had just annexed his family's ranch. He was forced to drive away, his mind reeling. He had the deed. How could a fake HOA claim his land? The initial conflict had just escalated into an attempted property theft. Mark drove straight to his family lawyer's office. Mark's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was initially dismissive. "Mark, this is silly. They're trying to bluff you. A few nasty letters, a cease and desist, and they'll fold." But Ms. Victoria Sterling, still appointed governess, was aggressively doubling down. Mark's attorney sent a strongly worded demand for immediate removal. Sterling's response was chilling. A formal packet, claiming Mark's property was distressed and had been judicially attached due to imminent aesthetic hazard and a breach of the original boundary covenant that allegedly transferred the perimeter to the HOA's control. This was a complete fabrication, but it looked terrifyingly official. The packet also included a demand for payment and non-compliance lien of $50,000, allegedly for fencing remediation and administrative processing of the land transfer. If not paid, they threatened foreclosure. Mark filed a motion for an injunction. But Sterling's inner circle was playing dirty, cultivating a cozy relationship with a minor local magistrate. The injunction hearing was a disaster. Sterling showed up with an army of board members, presenting a deluge of fabricated minutes, doctored maps, and the most outrageous part, a fake deed that allegedly showed Mark's great-grandfather had agreed to the annexation. The magistrate, overwhelmed and swayed by Sterling's polished presentation about protecting property values, denied the injunction. He declared the matter required a full evidentiary trial, which would take 6 to 9 months, and permitted the temporary restraint to remain in place. Mark was utterly helpless. The fake HOA had successfully seized control. Sterling began using the land as if it were her own. She organized community cleanup days on the ranch, bringing dozens of residents onto Mark's private property. She installed a temporary bright red construction trailer, declaring it the Blackwood Ridge Ranger Station. Mark drove by and saw a community meeting happening right on his land. Under a massive banner reading the future Blackwood Ridge Central Park, a Sterling vision. The audacity was staggering. Mark couldn't step foot on the land without being arrested for trespassing on a property that, by court order, was temporarily under the control of the fake HOA. The pressure mounted when the bank, seeing the public dispute and the fraudulent lien, froze Mark's ranch equity line of credit. His ability to fund the legal fight was drying up. The fake HOA was operating with impunity, effectively annexing his property acre by acre, turning his ancestral home into their community amenity. Mark was legally barred from defending his property, and the governess was transforming his land while his hands were tied. He was at his absolute breaking point. Mark realized a straight legal fight was too slow and too expensive against an opponent using outright fraud. He needed undeniable evidence. He hired a private investigator, Rick, to document every single action. Rick focused on 3 areas. First, securing audio of Victoria Sterling and her board making their fraudulent claims. Second, tracing the source of the fake deed. Third, finding the true legal status of the HOA. The fallout for Victoria Sterling and her rogue arc was immediate and brutal. The news of the arrest spread through Blackwood Ridge like wildfire. The legitimate HOA members were furious, learning the funds Sterling had used to hire security and file the fraudulent lien had been siphoned directly from the HOA's reserve funds. The legitimate HOA board quickly convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to strip Sterling of all board privileges, ban her from community involvement, and initiate a massive civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. The criminal proceedings were relentless. The audio evidence and the notary's testimony, Sterling's defense, evaporated. She was formally indicted on multiple felony counts, facing a serious prison sentence. The compliance officer, Mr. Hemlock, flipped, turning state's evidence against Sterling in exchange for immunity. His testimony detailed how Sterling manufactured the minutes and coached them on what lies to tell the magistrate. The biggest piece of payback was Mark's countersuit. Mark didn't just sue for legal costs. He sued for trespass, slander of title, emotional distress, punitive damages, and aggressively for the full estimated market value of the 200-acre ranch, arguing Sterling's actions had rendered the title uninsurable and depressed the property's sale value. The total amount Mark sought was well into the millions. Sterling attempted to sell her 7-figure home to cover her legal bills, but Mark's lawyer filed a massive preventative lien on her personal residence, mirroring the fraudulent lien she had filed against his ranch, freezing the sale and guaranteeing she would have to pay Mark before she could liquidate her assets. The payback was precise. She who used a lien to terrorize was now paralyzed by one. The public humiliation was the cherry on top. An anonymous neighbor created a massive banner that read, "Victoria Sterling, convicted felon and HOA thief." They hoisted it onto the main flagpole at the entrance to Blackwood Ridge, where it was photographed hundreds of times. Sterling went from governess to a pariah overnight, her reputation destroyed, her assets frozen, and her freedom in jeopardy. Mark wanted a final, definitive, symbolic end. The long-term aftermath was a structural overhaul of the Blackwood Ridge community. The disgraced magistrate was investigated and censured. The legitimate HOA, terrified of liability, completely rewrote their bylaws, created strict oversight, and issued a formal public apology to Mark, specifically stating they had no jurisdiction over Coyote Creek Ranch. Mark, with uncontested control, decided to make a dramatic statement. Victoria Sterling had touted her sterling vision for the land, a manicured, concrete-heavy community park. Mark used the massive settlement he eventually won from Sterling, a settlement that finally forced her to sell her house at a distressed price for a single, grand project. He hired an environmental reclamation specialist. He took the portion of his land that Sterling had cleared and surveyed for her park and returned it to its wildest, most natural state. He planted hundreds of native trees, reintroduced local grasses, and restored the original flow of the creek. He created a massive private, protected wildlife preserve and registered it with the state as such, ensuring the land could never be commercially developed or annexed. The sign he erected was custom-made, placed exactly where Sterling's Blackwood Ridge Central Park banner had stood. It read, "Coyote Creek Ranch Wildlife Preserve. Nitrogen, monoxide, trespassing, private land, not subject to HOA jurisdiction, restored in memory of the ancient. Borders, the final, most satisfying act of revenge, involved Victoria Sterling herself. As part of her plea deal, she was convicted of fraud and sentenced to a significant period of community service and probation. The judge delivered the final poetic punishment. Her community service was to be performed at the local county land records office, where she would spend a mandatory 500 hours organizing and filing legitimate property. It's a daily reminder of the integrity she had betrayed. She was forced to drive past the entrance to Blackwood Ridge, past the new sign that affirmed Mark's victory and the failure of her vision every single day. Mark's quiet, devastating response, turning the site of her planned crime into a protected sanctuary, was the final nail in the coffin. The ultimate non-verbal declaration that the ranch was his. It was wild, and the reign of the fake HOA was over forever. What a story, folks. Victoria Sterling got what she deserved, and Mark got his land back, turning a tragedy into an environmental triumph. If you were Mark, what would you have done with the settlement money? Let me know the most shocking moment in the comments below. Was it the fake deed, the arrest, or that final beautiful revenge? Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive dramas. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the madness, and we will see you on the next Property Nightmare Stories.